Welcome to the first edition of the Bangalore Tableau User Group for 2026. It's fantastic to see so many familiar faces and also some new ones joining us today. So, just a brief about the Bangalore Turk. Like it's a fantastic hub for the data and analytics professionals to come along, and this community is a perfect reflection of that. So we're not just focusing on the new features or the latest roadmaps, but we're also here to share the real world experiences and also ask questions and learn from each other's challenges and together collectively grow as data professionals. And whether you're somebody who's just a beginner in your Tableau or a database journey, or somebody who's been a veteran in building, dashboards for years, I'm pretty sure that today's session has something, valuable for all of you. So I encourage all of you to stay curious, take notes, or whatever works best, and most importantly, participate. So please try to ask questions, and that is where our community thrives when all of us share. Let's make this session interactive and insightful. All right, this is our first session for 2026. Just some housekeeping before we go into the deep dives. The event is being recorded, and audio and video initially are disabled. For any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature, and our team is here to support you with any of your queries. I hope the audio and the video is visible and you're able to hear the audio as well. If you have any challenges, please put it on the chat and somebody from our team will be able to check that immediately. So just a quick intro to the Bangalore Tableau user group. So we are currently a team of four. Initially, like Anirudh and myself were started, and now we have two exciting, team members who have joined us, Ankur and Devendra. Like all four of us will be collectively leading the Tableau Bangalore user group. And a quick run through of today's agenda. So we have our introduction and some key updates, and then we have our guest speaker Amanda, who will be sharing her insights around the data visualization and also the storytelling. And then towards the end, we have Q&A, and there'll be closing remarks and some updates as well for the roadmap that we have planned for the year ahead. Some quick guidelines. Like I said, this session will be recorded, and a copy of the slides and this recording will be shared on YouTube as well. So feel free to listen more, and then if you have any questions or if you want to you can always revisit on the YouTube and other social media channels where Bangalore Tab will be posting. If you have any difficulty hearing, or if you're not able to see the screen, or if you're not able to hear the audio properly, please check your devices and try to rejoin if needed. And if you have any questions, like I said, please feel free to use the Q&A box, and then we'll take those questions towards the end. So without further ado, today we have our guest speaker, Amanda. So Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today for the Bangalore Tug event. And Amanda is a data visualization leader, and she's focused on making meaningful and responsible, data information that is primarily used across the visualization community. So she worked across most of the public and nonprofit sectors, and also in the teaching community, especially with the Data Viz Society, where she has shared a lot of key information around data visualization and insights. And she also is an author of some of the books around data visualization. Please feel free to check that. We'll be posting the book details in the chat as well. Without further ado, over to you, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm thrilled to have a chance to join you virtually from a very snowy Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We were joking about the fact that the weather is very different in our different locales right now with the snow that we have piling up outside. I want to give a shout out to the organizers for all the labor that goes into these community groups. And I say that from having helped to start up and lead the Data Visualization Society for a long time, that these kind of communities only exist because of the generosity and time that organizers give. So kudos to everyone who spent their time going ahead and helping to support that effort with this tug or with other data visualization communities. So today we're going to talk for the next 30, 40 minutes about this arc from story finding with dashboards to storytelling with data. And I'm going to try to make the case that we should all take a bit of care and time when we're adapting charts from a dashboard that we build for presentation purposes or other storytelling with data opportunities, and hopefully give you some practical tips and tricks for how you can do that, even just working with screenshots off of a dashboard. The practical reality is that oftentimes we get excited about the ways in which dashboards get used in any way, shape, or form, including having them repurposed for presentations in other spaces. And something that I have done a lot with my clients is to help them learn how to adapt those dashboards into more effective data stories. And I hope that by the end of this talk, you'll have some ideas of how to do that yourself and some ideas of how you might coach and work with clients who are repurposing and using the great dashboards that you all build into data stories. For a bit of an introduction, just going a little bit deeper, I'm Amanda McCulloch. I am a data viz designer based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I do serve as adjunct faculty at the Maryland Institute College of Art, where I teach in the Data Analytics and Visualization Master's Program. I'm a co-author of Dashboards That Deliver, which sits back here behind me, which is our lovely book that came out in September of this past year from Wiley. You may be familiar with the predecessor to Dashboards That Deliver, which is the Big Book of Dashboards that my wonderful co-authors, Steve, Jeff, and Andy wrote over 5 years ago. And Dashboards That Deliver is a great companion to the Big Book of Dashboards, both featuring really in-depth case studies and examples and scenarios of dashboards in the real world. But Dashboards That Deliver talks a lot more about process and the process and teams that go into building great dashboards. So I encourage you to check it out. I'll put a link into the chat. I'll put in the plug also that I know that getting books shipped in various corners of the world can be challenging. We do offer a free downloadable 3 chapters, including the framework chapter on our website, as well as having a lot of downloadable templates and resources on our Dashboards fan club. So I hope you'll check that out. I promise that's the end of my pitchy piece of this morning's presentation. But if you're into dashboards and dashboard design, it is the book that I wish I had when I started this journey 15 years ago. And so I'm really excited that it's out there in the world. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about data storytelling versus data story finding or exploratory analysis, and the different tools that we use for different purposes. Because as I'll say today, I think language and understanding our terms collectively is really important when we're collaborating and communicating as communities or as a team. So I love data storytelling. It's one of the reasons I got really invested in data visualization, is because of the power of visuals as one part of that data storytelling arc. My roots are actually in public health, where I started as a researcher and evaluator who was going through the whole arc of collecting data and information to answer research questions and then present that data back to different people to try to convince them to take action or invest in programs or fund new opportunities to improve health outcomes. And data storytelling is a really powerful way to make those things happen. But I have found that we don't all mean the same thing when we use that phrase. It's become a phrase that's become so ubiquitous and something that generates so much excitement that I think it gets used to mean a lot of different things. And I'll give you a few examples. When we think about data visualization more broadly, though, I want to kind of lay out that I think there are a couple of key axes that our visualizations fall along. Oftentimes, visualizations are designed either for exploration or story finding, or for explanation, storytelling. This explore, explain continuum comes up in Andy's podcast. I'm forgetting his last name. Goodness gracious, not Kriebel. But Andy Kirk's podcast, Explore, Explain, and comes up a lot as we think about how we kind of qualify and codify different data visualizations. And you can use Tableau to build data visualizations meant for either thing, story finding or storytelling. We also have other ways we describe different data visualizations. These other kind of binaries are data visualizations that we're building more static, or are they interactive? Are they conceptual in nature or quantitatively based? Are they digital or physical? There are many ways we can think about and classify what we mean when we say data visualization. And even taking a step back and aligning with clients and teams on all of those other features can be really important for making sure we're all working to build the same kind of data product. When it comes into data storytelling, though, I think data storytelling can fall into two buckets itself. There's more expository kind of data storytelling where we're laying out a sequence of facts. And there's more narrative-based data storytelling where there is a clear kind of story arc and characters and other things that we're following as well along with the quantitative information. And so as we think about what the world of data storytelling is, I want to put out there that words matter. They do matter, but why? And there's a value in shared language when we're using words like storytelling or dashboards, because when we talk with a friend or a colleague who we're working with or collaborating with, having a shared understanding of what we mean by a data story can lead us to make very different data products. Are we building a data story that's a scrolly telling piece versus an interactive dashboard or something else? If you ask a dozen people to draw a data dashboard, you're likely to get somewhat similar responses. You'll have some kind of frame that has various different big numbers across the top or KPIs, has a couple different charts, and you'll get sketches that kind of lean in the same direction. And we saw that when we were bringing together examples for dashboards that deliver, where we have 15 different scenarios in the book, all of which look different. Some are light mode or dark mode, or have one really big anchor chart versus smaller charts. There's lots of different iterations on that theme, but they all have a similar kind of dashboardy look to them, some combination of various charts and numbers presented in a logical sequence or grouping. If you ask people to draw a data story, you're likely to get a much more wide range of responses. And that's in part because of some, I think, variations in how people define data storytelling. Now, Gartner says that data storytelling combines interactive data visualization with narrative techniques to deliver insights in compelling, easily assimilated forms. Analytic stories aim to prompt discussion and collaborative decision-making. And data stories can take several forms: connected slideshows, storyboards, annotated dashboards, with annotated carrying a lot of weight there, and graphic design style infographics. And I like Gartner a lot. I think they do a lot of really great research around how different parts of technology and fields are evolving. But these Gartner definitions really are so wide ranging that it's hard to imagine what that might look like. And it's one of the reasons why I think we've seen data storytelling fall in different parts of this overall kind of curve that shows us the arc of the hype cycle from which a new idea comes out and there's a technology trigger, up to a peak of inflated expectations, down into the trough of disillusionment, and into the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. If you haven't seen a Gartner hype cycle before, all of the hype cycles that Gartner puts out with their research follow the same kind of arc. And they go ahead and they say, what is it that we're going ahead and seeing in the market that's either kind of new, emerging, and people are really excited about, or that is now kind of widely used? And we've seen things like data visualization be codified along this arc. And in 2022, data storytelling was hovering about 4 years ago in this peak of inflated expectations, where we thought that data storytelling was going to fix and change and revolutionize the ways in which people engage with and communicate data. And we are in a very interesting kind of different world now, where we have a lot of Gen AI tools that enable you to interact with and connect with data in different ways. And I'm curious to see how that might shape what the future looks like. But I've found that perhaps we've kind of fallen into this trough of disillusionment in my world, where there's a lot of confusion about what we mean by data stories. Because even these big research organizations say things like, in contrast to dashboards used for monitoring, data storytelling techniques are used to inform and educate decision makers. But dashboards can also be used to inform and educate decision makers. I would argue that exploratory dashboards are one of the best tools out there to enable people to explore and look for different kinds of information. So this gets into the weeds of how the definitions we have around stories get a little bit too complicated. Now, dashboards are also complex to go ahead and define. And in dashboards that deliver, we use the same definition as in the big book of dashboards, where we actually use a very clear way of defining a dashboard with a very broad definition. Now, you may, from a Tableau perspective, be familiar with the ways in which Tableau labels a dashboard, where dashboards are any kind of place where you are aggregating multiple sheets or charts of data. And I think that that's one of the places that causes some confusion too, that we call things that are actually kind of long form scrolly data stories dashboards. But for the purpose of this talk and for our book, we said that a dashboard is just a visual display of data used to monitor conditions and or facilitate understanding, which is very broad and can mean a lot of things and be very inclusive to a lot of different ways we might present data. And dashboarding tools can be used to create great data stories. The dashboard frame in Tableau can be used to create beautiful scrolly telling pieces. But great analytical dashboards aren't often the best place to tell data stories. And that's in part because of the ways in which we construct and add different components onto a dashboard to enable interactivity and people to filter where the story is going to change as the data is updated and as they apply different filters and frames to what the data looks like. And so it's harder to generate those kind of key takeaway headlines and titles that make for great data stories. So if we go back to how we might define data stories and go away from the Gartner definition, which I think is particularly messy because it mixes up the things we think of about what good dashboards are and good stories, I really like Robert Casara's definition. And he goes away from just thinking about data stories as this kind of dramatic arc, this idea that a story must have this specific dramatic arc of space and time, and challenges us to think a little bit differently. Josh Smith, who was an Iron Viz winner a while back, years ago, actually said that storytelling is challenging because it's used as a blanket statement to describe how well information is presented in an interpretable presentation with a logical flow. And when we think about the ways in which we present and share information in a data story, I think that one of the challenges in competitions like Iron Viz and other spaces is storytelling as a scoring category, and having a clear, again, definition of what we mean is important. So Robert actually goes back to basics, actually in a blog post from more than a decade ago, but it's still one of my favorite ways of framing out what a data story is and how it connects with people in different ways. And a data story does three key things. It ties facts together where there's a reason why this collection of facts is in this story, and the story gives you the reason. It provides a narrative path through those facts where it guides the reader through the world rather than just throwing them in there. And it presents a particular interpretation of the facts. A story is one path through a world, so it favors one way of seeing things through others. And that's important because in a dashboard, we're expecting people to find their own data stories. We are enabling them to explore data and do this story finding rather than telling them what they should see on a chart. So let's use a public health example, a simple chart, and look at this single kind of simple chart with 5 data points on it. Here looking at cervical cancer screening data from the US from 2017 to 2021. When you look at this data, you can think about different data stories or headlines you could tell using this chart. And thinking in the frame of headlines can be really helpful when moving away from a kind of a title that's driven by a metric versus something you want to see. So we might go ahead and focus on the decline, right? Cervical cancer screening rates dropped during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's one story we could tell in the data. We could put some red coloring onto the line chart to make people kind of mentally think, is something wrong? Is something bad? Or we could say cervical cancer screening rates have started to recover since the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen them start to go back up. We change the color palette to blue or green or something that doesn't have that same alerting kind of feel. And that's a very different story, a story that is a story of celebration rather than concern, and creates different sentiment for our users or our end users of our dashboard or the readers of our data stories, and challenges us to go ahead and think about what we want them to do with that data. Now, missing from this chart right now is this question around, are these numbers even good to begin with? So if we see like our cervical cancer screening rates are in the 50% range, that's only 1 in 2 people. And so perhaps there's an illustrative target that we're missing. Cervical cancer screening rates continue to miss a target. What's the context we need to add to help people understand if this data point is cause for celebration or concern? And again, our headlines and our takeaway titles should help someone understand whether something is cause for celebration or concern when we're doing data storytelling. But a story should also help us understand why something happened and to whom. Robert says this as part of his definition, and adding that key piece around why something happened, bringing in context and other insights and ideas is really important. In a dashboard, we're often working with the quantitative data that can be automated and refreshed in our dashboard, and don't always have the qualitative insights around different strategic pivots or changes or new campaigns that were run. And so as data visualization designers and data analysts, part of our job is to help to understand that why. So we might ask, why do we keep missing these cervical cancer screening rate targets? And we can go out to research in other spaces and say, why are people not receiving screening? And here's a graph from a paper that focused on looking at why people were or were not getting screened. And we can see that the biggest reason for not getting screened that held across almost 15 years from 2005 to 2019 was because they didn't know they needed to. And so we can start to add some additional annotations onto a chart if we wanted to tell a clearer data story. The headline here, cervical cancer screening is a critical prevention measure, but only half of eligible patients are up to date. And then adding some additional annotations onto the chart itself. These would be really tedious to go ahead and put onto a dashboard and have to update manually or feed in some kind of text-based data set to go ahead and auto-populate captions. But they're really important and helpful when we're taking a chart like this line chart from a dashboard on cervical cancer data and putting it into a presentation. Because without giving some key takeaway titles and some key points of information to tell a clearer data story, we leave it open to the interpretation of our audience on whether this is a story of celebration or concern and what I should do with the data. So I want to dive in and give a very kind of specific set of examples on 10 tips for adapting dashboard charts into data stories and what that might look like for us as dashboard designers. I think it's I'm going to give a very practical kind of walkthrough example, and then I'm very curious about some of your questions and some of the instances or use cases you've had where you've seen your own dashboards have screenshots taken or otherwise put onto slide sets. And I will say that one of the points that I always get frustrated with is when someone takes a really grainy screenshot of my dashboard, plops it into a slide set, and then puts some boxes around it and says, well, focus your attention here with these boxes. Because oftentimes it turns into information overload, which is something we want to avoid when we're telling clearer data stories. So when we think about the ways we're presenting information, sorry, we clicked forward a bit fast there. Storytelling isn't always the goal, especially on dashboards, right? So dashboards are often designed for exploration or story finding rather than communication. And we're going to take this nice, lovely example of a perfectly fine dashboard looking at renewable energy data. So this is a renewable energy infrastructure and resources dashboard from the US Energy Atlas. And it's focused on looking at where renewable energy is being generated throughout the US and being able to drill down by state. So for example, I can drill down and look at data only for the state of Wisconsin. And it wouldn't be a great conversation about who we're telling stories to if we didn't have an audience. So we're going to put forward today that my audience for my data story that I'm building out is Caspian. Caspian is a very cool first grader. Caspian is also my son, and he's awesome. And let's say that Caspian's been learning about renewable energy in school. He knows his dad works in solar and wonders how much of our energy in Wisconsin comes from renewable sources. Any good data story, like any good dashboard, should start with identifying who your audience is and what it is that they need to know or how they'll use that data. So Caspian wants to know about how much energy in Wisconsin comes from renewable sources. The constraint I'm going to put on adapting this lovely dashboard into a data story for Caspian that mirrors the real world is we're not going to recreate any charts in another tool. The practical reality is we're often working in a tool like Tableau where we have the capabilities to change, adapt, reframe, resize different charts and graphs. But our audiences and users who are sometimes taking those screenshots and adapting our dashboards for data storytelling don't have that capability. So everything we'll walk through right now is all fully focused on how we use the dashboard as it is. So we don't want to go ahead and start with giving Caspian this very complex dashboard, right? He's awesome. He's 6. He's very adept with technology, like many young children are these days. But if I want to have him answer a question about renewable energy in Wisconsin, I don't think the first place I'm going to send him is this dashboard. I think he'd be a little bit overwhelmed. And so instead, we're going to focus in on one primary chart to start what our data story looks like. So here we're looking at summer capacity for how much energy is generated by renewable sources. And we see this bar chart that has been laid out that has gray coloring for most of the non-renewables, except for wind. We can have a conversation about contrast, but wind on the far right, and then the other renewables in color. And we can go ahead and look at this and say, all right, so kind of what share of energy is coming from renewables, or what does that look like? And we can think about the ways in which we can focus in on that one story and say, let's look at this chart as a starting place. Then we can think about how we can take some better screenshots to go ahead and start to build out our little slide deck for Caspian or for our illustrative audience, wherever they might be. Oftentimes, we're working in the confines of different aspect ratios, where maybe we have a big rectangular chart that doesn't work quite so well for annotating and putting on a slide. Where we can, it can be helpful to resize the windows you're looking in terms of looking at the windows you're looking in, so that your chart becomes something that fits onto a dashboard a little bit more effectively and fits from a dashboard over into slides. So we can resize this chart to kind of resize the window to get it to be more of a square, to fit on a slide a bit better. And we can remove some of the additional clutter that we have that can come on a dashboard screenshot, especially if you're using someone else's tools. Things like the little border around the edge and the outside, the little feature where we have a little expander thing in the upper right-hand corner that you actually can't use, obviously, in a PowerPoint slide deck. So find ways to take better screenshots using high resolution tools like Snagit, and making sure that you're thinking about that aspect ratio in how you adapt that chart over into a slide, which can have a different kind of display set of constraints that you're working with. Then we think about what the clear headline is. When I look at a chart like this, and the chart title on the dashboard itself is the metric, which is very typical when the data story might change, we want to add a clear headline and any text annotations we can to emphasize the key point you want to make. Solar is the largest renewable energy source in Wisconsin. Now, that is something that we see by focusing on the colored sections in terms of seeing the solar output. It's obviously dwarfed by natural gas in terms of overall kind of energy sources, but it's the largest renewable energy source in Wisconsin, which helps get to Caspian's questions about renewable energy in the state where he lives. Then we can think about how do we add select kind of direct labels. So adding data labels can be a really effective way to focus attention on specific data points. Here, for example, someone has to really kind of map the solar to the solar. We maybe need a legend to come back in perhaps, or some other way to focus that attention. And by going ahead and adding labels, we give more specific information. In dashboards, we often rely on tooltips and other interactive features to give someone the precise data point that they need to know. And adding labels to every point can overwhelm our readers. But by selectively labeling, going back to the dashboard, finding out what the actual number is, so 2.1 kilowatts being generated or megawatts being generated, and then going ahead and pulling that label out and labeling directly with text on the chart within our presentation, which allows us to, again, focus attention and give more details. So we might also start to adapt our title a little bit. Solar is the largest renewable in Wisconsin, accounting for 12% of summer capacity. That's interesting, good to know in terms of what that looks like. Gives us a sense of its overall share of energy, which is relatively small on the scale of energy sources. And we can start to add a little bit more kind of context and clearly indicate kind of segments that the data in the chart represents. What are the filters that we've selected? For example, here, making sure we're bolding and focusing in on the fact that this is in Wisconsin, and helping people understand kind of what additional filters have been applied to the data. That might get more complex and more complex dashboards, where you want to make sure you're pulling through those kind of components that help people understand what the data is representing, because they can't see the filters and other things you've selected. When we do this, we can think about the ways in which we go ahead and we can see data differently on dashboards. So this dashboard has an option that you can change the view from a bar chart that looks at overall energy sources, everything, and then focuses only on renewables by energy source. So here you can see we've pivoted to a 60% solar share of the donut chart, which is because it's the share of renewables overall, not total energy. But that might make our case even better to Caspian about what the largest renewable source is in Wisconsin. And it's great when dashboards give us this option to look at data in different ways and to pivot in different ways to see data differently. But it can be a little bit confusing sometimes as those numbers change and you have to follow the story of what's represented, which is again where those text titles become so important. So we might pivot and say, I want to, instead of doing that bar chart, looking at overall solar output, which is getting a bit confusing for us in terms of muddling a title with the chart itself, instead say solar is the largest renewable energy source in Wisconsin, accounting for 60% of renewable capacity. Now, you could make the argument that now it seems like we're overstating the amount of renewable energy in Wisconsin, and that certainly could be true, which is where starting to pair together different charts can be really helpful. But here you see we have the donut chart that was given to us from the dashboard itself, and we can see that it's 60% of renewable capacity. But these labels and other things are all a little bit messy. The segment I care about the most is not what's starting at noon, kind of the top of the clock on my donut chart in terms of the largest segment. And overall, I find it to be a little bit hard to track and follow because of the small size of the text, which can be an additional challenge when we're going ahead and presenting data from a dashboard over in an actual presentation set. So perhaps I could go ahead and I could crop that chart, that visual down to a circle. This is still just the visual that was from the dashboard itself. I haven't recreated it. I could rotate it so that my segment I care about the most does start at the top to emphasize the solar component. And I can manually add my own little labels. And as you think about the ways in which you adapt and you take a chart from a dashboard and turn it into a more effective data story or visual presentation of that data, those text components being easy to understand, directly labeling segments and making those easy to read is something that has such a transformative effect on how you focus your reader's attention. Then we might go back to the bar chart and maybe we introduce this idea with solar as the largest renewable energy source in Wisconsin, but non-renewables still account for the majority of energy production in the state, with solar at only 12%. These two charts together allow people to have the context that they need to go ahead and put those two pieces of data together and read that through in a clear sentence, where even if you didn't see the charts themselves, they would know the key takeaways. Now, it may be helpful to go ahead and recreate the chart and sort it in a way that you clearly see the ranked order on solar. So you could do that, take these numbers, plop them in Excel or another tool and do that. But recognize that that's not always feasible for us. And so working with the charts you have is okay too. But sort orders can be very powerful. We can also go ahead and find ways to emphasize different data stories with color. So there are many ways we use color in data visualization. If you're a data viz designer, you are someone who I hope has kind of thought purposefully about the ways you use color in different ways. And in dashboards, we often use color to encode information or data, right? Sequential color palettes or diverging color palettes. We also use different colors on dashboards such that they allow us to see a story on the dashboard as we move through multiple charts, which can translate into a slide set or not. As you're going ahead and thinking about how you take a chart from a dashboard and adapt it into a data story, this is where the highlight and alerting palettes where grayscale with some color can become really powerful. And so if you have the option to recolor your charts, that can be a powerful way to, again, focus attention. If we're emphasizing with color, you can see in this dashboard, they've assigned 4 different colors to the renewable sources. That makes some logical sense. The categorical colors they've picked are yellow for solar, the sun. Wind is gray, which we'll run with it. Biomass is green, makes sense. And then hydroelectric, hydro is blue, like water. And so there's some logical reasons why each of those colors have been selected. Then we could think about, as we're pulling data from a dashboard over into a data story, how we create kind of composite images. Instead of just taking a screenshot of a map, where we just have the map with all these little icons that don't really make a lot of sense, think about the ways in which we make sure we grab the other components someone needs to create a single image that communicates that data more clearly. Now, in the dashboard itself, they actually have a legend that includes all the different kinds of data source or the kinds of energy sources. And that's a lot of information. And I only actually have 4 different kinds of energy on my map here. So I don't really need that whole list in my presentation because it might overwhelm or make someone wonder like, well, where are the petroleum plants? Instead, because we're focusing on the renewable sources, we might just create a legend that has just those renewable sources. And this single kind of image is created actually by taking 3 separate screenshots and layering them together and being thoughtful and purposeful about how that's done. We also want to find ways to reduce visual clutter. You can do this by matching the background when you're going ahead and actually layering a chart onto a slide, and color matching the slide background to the dashboard or chart background, which can help you more seamlessly blend your charts into your presentation. As you're wrapping up, as we get to tips 9 and 10, the tip number 9 is to make sure you clearly cite the source and the date accessed if you're adapting a dashboard into a presentation. Oftentimes, data on dashboards are being refreshed or changed. And so it's really important that we make sure we reference when it was we pulled that data, because those numbers may evolve and change with time, and what the data source was, so someone can validate that it's from a reputable, reliable, trustworthy source. Now, let's think about the ways in which we put all these pieces together, moving from a single screenshot where we have one chart that we've plopped onto a slide to a scaffold that tells a clearer data story. We can create richer stories by introducing sequential pieces of information, kind of scaffolding components of the dashboard. The way we read kind of down a dashboard, that data is scaffolded for us there. But when we're presenting, we want to give people one piece of information to process and think about at a time. So we start with our kind of proposition to Caspian that solar is the largest renewable source in Wisconsin, accounting for 60% of capacity. Let our chart occupy a nice 2/3 of our slide and make that case. Then, but non-renewables still account for the majority of energy production in the state, with solar at only 12%. And finally, solar facilities are distributed across the state, because Caspian might want to know, are there solar facilities by me where I live? But concentrated in southern Wisconsin. Wind sites are more common in the north. Now, if I'm presenting to Caspian and I'm giving him the option to figure out what's happening with renewable energy in Wisconsin, do you think he would have a better time exploring and finding the data himself on this dashboard, or seeing a clear data story mapped out to him? Now, I would argue that he would probably enjoy the clear data story. You might enjoy the exploratory side of things, and that's okay. But the practical reality is that oftentimes our audiences are working with limited amounts of time, especially executives and other decision makers that we want to have use our data. And so having our dashboards used to create more efficiency in how people get the charts and analytics that they need, packaged in ways that they can quickly consume them, is a good thing. I find it that sometimes people push back and saying you shouldn't, as a dashboard designer, encourage people to go ahead and take screenshots and plop them into non-interactive spaces. But I get excited anytime someone's actually using my dashboard for some purpose and using it for decision making or information sharing. And so as we think about the most effective ways to present and translate data from a dashboard into data stories, thinking about the ways in which we can do the thinking and present the key takeaways and findings while still reinforcing with those charts is really powerful. And while it may seem a bit pithy, I suppose on a Saturday, to go ahead and use a 6-year-old as my target audience for this presentation, the reality is that a lot of people who are engaging with data in the world have limited amounts of data literacy and data fluency, that actually navigating their way through a dashboard and picking all the different filters can feel overwhelming. And if there are ways we can help work with our audiences or help others present to their audiences more effectively by packaging and giving those key takeaways, I think we've helped raise the bar about the ways in which people interact with data by making it more friendly and easier to understand. So let's wrap up from story finding to storytelling, and then I'd love to take your questions about this presentation or anything on the Data Viz Society or other data visualization spaces. As we think about that arc from data story finding to storytelling, when we're story finding with dashboards, we require a lot of labor from our users to go ahead and move their way through even a well-designed dashboard. Whereas when we're going ahead and we're filtering in and going down to a single story, we go ahead and we can focus people's attention more specifically. We want to go from having these kind of charts that have just what the metric is as the title and lots of small labels and maybe some tooltips to charts and graphs that clearly communicate a key analytical takeaway or finding. There will be times that you have to recreate those or find other ways to present that analysis. But where we can, it's great to adapt and use the tools that we already have. Now, when we did our dashboards at Deliver Book, we did some initial user research and found that 71% of people surveyed agreed that most dashboards failed. So 71% of mainly dashboard creators out of over 460 people thought that most dashboards failed, which is quite demoralizing when you're writing a book about dashboards and thinking about the ways they get used as tools. But I think maybe some of those failures are because we expect too much from dashboards. We expect dashboards to do too much. And we chastise rather than celebrate when users snip and repurpose our dashboards for presentation purposes, when instead it's an opportunity for people to use and engage and present that data. So in Dashboards That Deliver, we talk a lot about this kind of whole arc of development that starts from an audience and understanding our audience, that hopefully we can build better dashboards and data tools for exploratory purposes. But at the end of the day, I think it's important that we recognize the ways in which those tools empower our users to also present their findings and information more clearly. If you're curious about some of my reflections from actually a few years back on data storytelling and has it reached its peak, I wrote about it in the Nightingale a few years back around this specific topic, and happy to have you dive in there. And if you're looking to connect with me, you can find me on my website, on my Substack, or hanging out over in the DataViz Society Slack. You can also find the book on dashboardsthatdeliver.com. So would love to know what questions you all have for me, and a huge thanks again for having me for this presentation this morning. I hope you're taking away at least a couple ideas of how you might adapt and take your charts that you have presented on dashboards, so beautifully designed dashboards, I'm sure, and translate them into clearer and more specific data stories. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda, for a truly insightful session. I think one of the key takeaways for me was that I really like the examples in which you kind of, removed, let's say, some of the noise from so many of those examples, and then how you actually connected the dots to actually have a proper outcome towards the end. I think that was really insightful, and I think it is kind of resonates with even the production dashboards that we build. It's just about reducing all the clutters and then try to have those key takeaways added and highlighted so that the message gets delivered across the senior management.
Thanks. There's some fun questions in the Q&A. All right, these are great. Do you all want to pick and choose where we start in terms of the questions, or should I work through them in the order in which they were submitted?
Yeah, I think maybe we can go through the ones in which they were submitted, Amanda.
Sure. All right, so from Ravi, look at you seeding us with some good questions to start. From your experience, what's the most frequent pitfall when translating insights into a story, and how can teams address it? I think one big pitfall is not focusing what story you're telling very effectively, and trying to pull every single chart or component that you could share from a dashboard into that slide set or into that article or report or whatever else it is. So I think losing focus, that's why I start with focus on the 10 tips, is like you have to focus on what it is that you want someone to know and what it is that they can actually retain. So I think one big piece is that trying to say too much. The second is when people end up taking, like I said, a screenshot of a whole dashboard. I think we've all probably seen this. The whole dashboard gets dropped onto the slide, and then someone puts a box here and a box here and a box here, and they're like, look here, look here, look here. Instead of, again, helping someone focus and adapting those charts a little bit for other purposes. So focus, and then information overload as people try to translate that. If you're feeling stuck on how you take kind of the ideas from a dashboard and translate them into a data story, there are some really effective kind of story structures. The dramatic arc is one of them you could try to follow, and Brent Dykes has some great writing around that in a business context. But also think about the ways in which each of our charts in a presentation operates like its own little short story too, not just a scaffold. And just writing clearer headlines will make the takeaways easier to kind of understand for your end users. Let's see, we've got the time boxes on these changed too. All right, how can we explain from a data storytelling standpoint why a scatter plot is sometimes the most effective way to communicate an insight? Someone's got a lot of love for scatter plots. I love scatter plots too. They can be very effective. They can also be a little bit misleading on correlation causation, but that's a story for another time, I think. I think as you think about any kind of conversation with a client who says, I don't want to see the data that way, but you have a very clear sense of how you feel like the data should be shared. One thing I like to do is to go ahead and share data presented two ways. So if I have, say, a data that's presented as a set of bar charts and then a scatter plot where I separate the metrics out versus having them plotted together, I like to show clients, instead of just telling them I think one is better than the other, here's what A looks like, here's what B looks like. What do you think about these two, and why do you like one better than the other? And here's why I, from a cognitive science perspective, think this one works better. And wherever I can, I try to bring in references back to other kind of thinkers and researchers in data visualization who have helped to kind of dive in and understand why certain things have more or less cognitive load for folks. And so I think that A/B test piece and having a conversation where you're helping educate your stakeholder is really valuable in terms of how you can help kind of also make them feel like they're part of the process. Like, stakeholders like being part of the decision process and having a say in stuff, and then they can learn too. I mean, convincing public health folks to move away from paired bar charts over to dumbbell plots and other ways of better presenting the data has been a fun arc for me personally. I think our next question is, how would you adapt storytelling for dynamic data? So I think that this is where I think there's constraints on what a dashboard can do well. As data is dynamic and it's changing, the key takeaways and the analytical insights are also going to naturally change, right? Things that were going up are now going down. A segment that was performing the best is now not. And so I think you can think about how you construct a dashboard to give you the context and the insights to be able to tell clear stories for a given point in time. But stories by their nature are kind of capturing what's happened at one point in time. One thing I've done that tries to bring more of those text components of being able to understand what the data means a bit better is to go ahead and use more human readable tooltips on my dashboards, where if someone hovers over a data point, instead of having just the default Tableau table kind of view of the metrics and data points, I'll actually have it write out in a sentence where I add some text and then plug the metrics in, the different measures or field names. And then it will kind of read out what that actual metric means or what that data points means in plain language. And I find that's a helpful way to bring a little bit of that storytelling in from an interpretation perspective. But I think there just is kind of a set of challenges with trying to force dashboards to do too much. Dashboards are great for story finding. They're not always the best for storytelling, especially for data that's being updated in real time. There's also the constraints of just overloading from a performance perspective, your Tableau workbook, if you're to try to pull in a lot of the additional qualitative insights you might need. Nikhil said, I work for an ed tech firm where we are making monitoring dashboards for a state education department. That's very cool. While using the scaffold method for presenting to senior stakeholders, how do you ensure they do not lose the context? That's a good question. I think the reality is our senior stakeholders are often very constrained on their time and their interests. And so taking the time to go ahead and present the most important key points up front is important, and having those key headlines. I think that if you're in a space where you're giving someone a deck or some other content to go with the presentation, having additional references, context, data points that are in an appendix or somewhere else can be really helpful. Or referencing your dashboard for where they can go on the monitoring dashboard. I also think that adding context in terms of how you kind of scaffold and present information also means thinking about how do you layer in the things someone needs to know right on the chart itself. Sometimes I find that when we adapt a chart into a slide for data storytelling, in comes this long list of bullet points of things that could be annotations or captions on the chart. And so especially if you're actually making key points or takeaways about different items on a bar chart, or explaining why this metric dropped this quarter because of lower student enrollment or something else, actually adding those captions, even short form ones, on the chart itself so they don't get lost if someone skips all of your beautiful text that you've written out, can be really helpful. So wherever you can, kind of make your chart stand on its own on your slides, and make sure that you're not relying entirely on a bunch of bullets or small text to explain it. All right, going down. these are good. Have you ever faced a scenario where you made a great dashboard, included parameters for interactivity, but the end users opted for Excel or information in a text board? Absolutely, I have. Of course. Who hasn't? I mean, raise your hand in the chat if you've somehow gotten around that. People like tables. I mean, I oftentimes will go ahead and actually put like a self-service table as the last page in my dashboard, because people like being able to find the number that they want without going through your beautifully designed UX. I also have had dashboards that we've built out that wholly get consumed by PDFs that are generated through Tableau server and emailed to someone, because it meets them where they are in their inbox and they don't have to open up the Tableau server environment each morning. And I think the practical reality is that if someone is actually using the data in the dashboard, that's valuable. It means they have an interest in it. It means they are someone I might really want to talk to whenever I'm making my next round of changes on the dashboard, to understand what the dashboard's not doing for them. And to me, they're an interesting use case to say, let's go ahead and let's have a conversation about how we might update or improve the UX to be even more usable for you. But I think at the end of the day, we'll always have the download to Excel enthusiasts. And I feel like fighting that battle is a battle that is only worth fighting if there are data privacy, security, governance reasons, that's really not a responsible thing to do. How do you design and develop when multiple user types, say CXO, operations, category teams, are using the same dashboard but different insights? That's a great question. We oftentimes, when we're designing across different user personas, one question I ask is, can one dashboard actually serve all of them? And the reality sometimes is that it cannot. They need different things. The Children's Hospital Association dashboard that's in Dashboards That Deliver and is in the preview chapter download, so it's a great example, actually walks through how they developed these different personas who had different needs and how it reshaped and changed the sequence of dashboards that were in their workbook. I like to go back to Ben Schneiderman's first big picture, then zoom and filter, then details on demand mentality in terms of how I think about dashboards, and think about how I design so that the first page has the most important things for the priority user who has the least amount of time and is not going to click in and go look at other pages. And then go ahead and think about who will actually take the time to navigate and look through different views. I'm finishing up a dashboard build with a client right now, looking at some public health survey data. And we were specifically designing around kind of an advocacy persona and an analyst persona. And the reality is that if the advocacy persona arrives at the dashboard and is overwhelmed by the volume of data or the complex charts, because they have lots of confidence intervals and feel complicated to look at, that the epidemiologists want, they're not going to continue to browse through looking for better charts that suit their needs more. We'll lose them. But when the epidemiologists show up, the analysts show up on the dashboard, if they first see some like simpler, more informational graphic kind of visualizations, they're not going to not go look for the more complex things. And so I often think about who actually has the patience or the time that they're going to go dive into the other pages in the dashboard and make sure we're optimizing for whose attention we need to capture and grab first in that first spot. Let's see, we got a couple more questions. Let's see if we can lightning round these out. What's your experience working with researchers who are keen to put their explanatory work out as is without understanding the importance of the explanatory bit, which can come with the pushback from communicating research? I have worked with many public health researchers who are very wedded to their charts that are designed very much for academic journal publications and look very messy to me and don't have that clear takeaway, and they want to put all the caveats on it. I think when you're working with researchers, I often go back and ask the researcher about what it is they want someone to do with that data or that information, and where they think they'll consume it, and what they would be looking for as an audience in terms of what kind of visualizations they would want to engage with. Because at the end of the day, researchers don't do research usually for the sake of just doing it. They want to see it be used in the world to influence programs, policymaking, other things. And sometimes taking researchers back to, but what was the goal of this? Like, who's going to use it for what purpose? And then recognizing that there may be some audiences who want the complex interactive dashboard with all the bits, and some audiences who just need those high-level key takeaways. I also, on the flip side, in terms of a more kind of stick versus carrot approach, have asked researchers about what they think the risks might be of, say, a journalist misinterpreting something in their research or their data when they just put it all out there or put it all out in very complex, technical, jargony kind of language. And by actually distilling out the key takeaways, putting out kind of the high level findings, putting out the few key graphs that communicate the data well, you help to guide journalists and other people who might be covering that research and reporting on it to write more responsible headlines and to focus on the key findings that they care about the most. So I try to kind of approach it from a place of empathy and understand what that researcher might be motivated by and what that looks like. Oh, we're tight on time. Do you think we can go through two more? There's some good ones here. I see two.
Yes, we can go.
Let's do it. Do you think dashboard aesthetics using Figma or Canvas are very important when data storytelling, or sticking to the key data points is sufficient? I'm a very tool agnostic designer. I think you can make magic happen in Excel. But as you go ahead and you think about the aesthetic piece, I think it's important to move away from thinking about how do we make charts prettier, and instead think about how do we make charts more usable, memorable, engaging. And there's interesting research from Steve Francaneri and others at Northwestern University that actually tested out to see how well people could remember information from a chart if it was kind of designed defaulty, cluttery, whatever, even Tableau does it, or if it was decluttered a bit, so you had kind of decluttered key components off and simplified to a grayscale chart, or if you decluttered and focused attention with color and text. And when we spend the time to actually declutter our charts, make them more aesthetic, that's true, and then focus attention with color and text and highlighting, we make our data more memorable. And that's something that as a data viz designer, I care deeply about, that I want someone to remember the chart and have it be something they refer back to oftentimes, especially in public health. And so I do think the aesthetics are important, but they're not important because the goal is pretty. Aesthetics are important because they help make your work look more professional and more trustworthy, unfortunately, is kind of a correlation we have. And they actually make the data more memorable and easier to understand. They reduce cognitive load. All right, last, this is a nice, happy one to end on. What are some best practices or creative techniques you use in Tableau to beautify text tables and make them more visually engaging without losing clarity? The person who I think is the absolute master of elegant text tables is Luke Stanky. He's a former Tableau visionary, I think, but he has a couple excellent articles that were published when he was with Tessellation on ways to format text tables to communicate more effectively. I often actually look to and think about the world of data journalism in terms of who does text tables well, where when you think about data that's presented from, say, back in COVID, where a table might also include a little sparkline or area chart. There's some big number formatting that adds some color encodings to highlight different numbers or points and allows me to kind of focus my attention on the things that require my attention the most. I think the two mistakes that get made when we're applying a lot of formatting to text tables are we try to format everything to add some insight. And as a result, we have nowhere to focus because everything has color or encodings or other things added to it. So think about whether you want to focus someone's attention on things that are, again, cause for celebration or concern in terms of what you might highlight and focus on. I've even had options where in a drop-down menu, someone can change if they want to display a table or a chart highlighting the good things in green with everything else gray, or highlighting the negative things in red with everything else gray, which avoids the colorblind challenges of red and green together and focuses our attention on one kind of story or the start of one story. The other thing you can do is you can add additional like little visual icons or indicators of items to go ahead and focus attention with, like a little floating dot or something else on the side. I think the map layers functions in Tableau can be really helpful for being able to pull a lot of those components together into one cohesive visual. And so I'd encourage you to explore some of the map layers features. There's various people who've written a lot about those out there in the Tableau community. And I think Andy Kriebel has a couple different videos. He breaks down kind of how to use map layers to layer information together into a more visual table. And that can work really, really nicely. But being thoughtful about text, hierarchy, all those pieces is really valuable. I know we're right to be up at the end and the top of the hour in time, at least on my side, and I want to be mindful of everyone else's time as you go into your evenings over in India. But it was such a pleasure to have a chance to connect with everyone here today, and I'd love to stay in touch over LinkedIn or otherwise, and we'll hand it back over to our wonderful leaders to go ahead and wrap us up. And I'm going to find that Luke Stanky table post because he has a great article about tables.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda, and thanks everyone for asking such insightful questions. Just one more update as we wrap up.
Hi everyone, I'm Ankur. I also co-lead the tug with Ravi and Devinder and Anirudh. Anirudh and Devinder are not there. So our next event is right opposite to Amanda's topic. Sorry, Amanda.
What was that?
So, this is like right opposite to your topic, like ChatGPT and dashboards are dead.
Oh, I don't think dashboards are dead because we all need access to data and information, and we need access to tools to help us monitor it. And I work with a lot of nonprofits. They're not in a place where people are just doing everything with LLMs these days. But I think it's great for people to stay aware, as much as I'm more of an AI skeptic, of what's happening, right? We want to stay up to date on what's happening. I find it fascinating to see demos of how people are using AI tools with data visualization, and sometimes how those tools are failing. But I think that it's great to have a mix of different people and the kind of practical sides on either end.
Thanks, Amanda, for putting more light on this. I think you are the best to put exact light on this topic. Being said that, if you are someone who love to see other side of the dashboards where you can automate the dashboards using MCP servers, or you want to see the live demos, how it's done with help of within a Tableau server or Tableau cloud. So this is the best workshop for you. Please scan this code to register for this event, and we'll see you there in Feb. And thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
For a lovely session. It's really, really insightful.
Thanks. Have a great rest of your night, team, and I look forward to staying in touch with folks in the future.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.